Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cinema Savvy. It's myself, George, joined once more by Tayte and Tom for another entry in the Steven Spielberg Retrospective. We are up to Empire of the Sun, 1987 release, directed by Steven Spielberg, based on a book by J.G. Wells, which we'll be getting into a little bit later on. But before we get into all of that, how are we both doing today?
Yeah, doing really, really good today. It is very cold here in England today, hence why the big warm jacket. But no, interesting. Another film that I haven't actually seen before, so good to get into it.
I was actually going to say as well pre-recording Tate that I'm wondering why you've got a big woolly coat on.
It's
like I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt. I've no idea what you're complaining about.
I'm cold. I've left the window open, but it's too far for me to commit to go over and shut, so I'm not going to be doing that. But yeah, this is going to be a really fun one. I mean, Tate, you mentioned that you haven't seen this. It's the same for me. It's been sat on the shelf behind me for about 10 years. I'm not joking. And I know that this is one of your favorites, Tom, so that's going to be quite a fun dynamic as we get into it. But before we do, please do comment your thoughts on Empire of the Sun, everything about the film. It's been out 35 years now, so you don't have to worry about spoilers and whatnot. So please do hit that like button, comment, subscribe. There's a lot of stuff happening on the channel, a lot more Spielberg stuff every Tuesday. So if you're a fan of Spielberg, if you're a fan of Christian Bale, there's a big film of his coming out in a month. Thor, not the Dark World, but there's a new Christian Bale film. I've forgotten Thor: Love and Thunder. That's it. So there's going to be more Christian Bale stuff coming soon, and always a lot of other stuff on the channel. But Tate, where can the people find us? Because we've got 2 new destinations, I think, since we've done the announcements.
Well, you can find us not only on Twitter now, but you can also find us back on Instagram. Yes, we are back on Instagram across pretty much all platforms now. So if you follow us on Twitter, it's exactly the same tag. So it's at cinema_savvy on there. You can find us on Facebook just per usual, and also find us on Letterboxd. Also, very exciting, we are now switching from the previous store being used for our merch, TeePublic. We are now on Redbubble. This is going to take some time to, get that into my system. So say Redbubble as our people who do our merch. But yeah, if you want to pick up some merch, then it's going to be hopefully a lot easier for you to get hold of, a lot cheaper as well, with the same quality there. So go find us on Redbubble. Link is in the description.
Yes, everyone do check them out. We're new to that store as well. It's very different to TeePublic. But from what we know, I mean, we've spoke about it before. TeePublic is it used to be really good essentially, and now the shipping is just ridiculous. So a lot more people using Redbubble. We're on there as well. We've got t-shirt designs for the main logo here, the original logo, the Nolan logo, the Star Wars one, the Marvel one, kind of brackets, depending, some weird copyright stuff that shouldn't exist. And we're going to probably update this with some more stuff. So obviously a lot of it's our branded stuff, but maybe we'll put some director stuff on there or some cast stuff. Obviously you can't use copyrighted photos, but you can make some nice film stuff or TV stuff. So I think you can follow people on there. Again, we're not really sure how it works, if we're being honest. But that is going to be probably a little bit more than TeePublic was. And again, it makes it easier for people. And I'm finally going to be able to buy a baseball cap. That's one of the things I actually really wanted. And it actually looked good. It looked better than I thought it would on the preview. So I give it a few weeks and I'll have that maybe on a stream, maybe not. But yeah, talking Empire of the Sun. Now, I'm going to read the IMDb plot synopsis, as we always do on this series. Some of them are 3 paragraphs long, some are 1 line long. We've got a nice, sweet one today. A young English boy struggles to survive under Japanese occupation of China during World War II. Straight away, I say that's fine. However, he's, based off watching this the first time, so he's not struggling to survive. He's absolutely loving life. And we'll get into that a little bit later on. But me and Tate, we both spoke about we've not seen this film before. Before we actually give our initial thoughts, Tom, we're going to jump to you. Just give us your sort of history with it, or I don't know how often you saw it for the first time. Sort of really curious, because I know you're a big fan of this.
Yeah, I really am a big fan, and I absolutely loved it. The first time I watched it, which I genuinely can't remember when it was, maybe 15, 16, sort of early years of sort of my cinema sort of life cycle, I guess. But yeah, I absolutely fell in love with it when I first saw it, and it's one of the films that I don't watch very often, but when I do fall in love with it. It's the same with stuff like The Thin Red Line, The Assassination of Jesse James. You know, two films I absolutely love and adore, but I have to be in the right mood to watch them. And it's very much the same with this. Whilst I absolutely love it, it is one that you know is I do have to be in the mood for. But yeah, I've watched it a dozen times since then, and each time it's just gotten better and better. And before this, before starting recording, I just finished a rewatch as well, so I'm all prepped.
I was going to say, were you in the mood for the rewatch this time round?
I was, yeah. It wasn't because I was forced to do it to come up.
I mean, just following that, Tayte, I want to jump to you. I mean, first time you saw it, same with me. What did you know going into this? Like, did you know anything about this film? Because this is going to be a really big thing for me. Whereas I know obviously one of the things we all know, but I'm just curious if you've got any like background knowledge or anything.
So I knew it was a World War II film, kind of a prisoner of war film as well. But the biggest thing that I knew from this film going into it was everything surrounding Christian Bale as a very young actor in it. I see an awful lot of kind of lists online and just kind of people talking online about young acting performances. I've been a critique or critical of various different young actors in the past of their ability to act, and I'll always appreciate those who can act at a very young age because it is a very difficult skill to have. But this film, whenever you're looking through lists, always comes up very, very high. It's either this one or Tate O'Neill in Paper Moon that usually comes up as like the 1 or 2 on those lists and stuff like that of young actors in films. It's the fact that he was able to have such a good career out of this Christian Bale as well, that we've been able to follow throughout the years that kind of drew me into wanting to watch this. And especially knowing we were going into Steven Spielberg Retrospective, I did have this marked down as this one could be very interesting. This one could be very fun on the list.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating one because I knew he was in it. I knew he was when he was younger. And I'd never seen it. So I had it on the shelf behind me. And it's just, you know, when you've got that, and we always joke, you have the endless list of films. Someone recommends you a film, and I've just given up people saying it's on the list now, but the logic is still there. And with this, I was just very curious because I really like. I mean, how do people feel me calling this a war film? Because the concept of a war film is so. I think 21st century it's expanded into being associated with action films, whereas I don't feel the war films are. I think war films that tell stories of people living throughout war is more interesting than those on the battlefields and stuff. And heading into this, I just didn't know much. And I just talking Christian Bale like very briefly. We'll get into him properly later, but I didn't even know he was like the lead. I thought, okay, he'll be like, you know, like the sort of the main secondary character or something. But him leading this film in the mid to late 80s is just exceptional. And like even like Spielberg, I mean, we've spoke so many times recently that he's the best director when it comes to, I think, young cast members. You know, you get a lot of young actors. E.T. Is one of the big ones. There's some more in my head I've forgotten. Short Round, of course, Temple of Doom. But Spielberg's always been great with young actors, but have any of them gone on to have the career Christian Bale has had? Like one of, to me, the greatest actors working today. He's one of my favorite actors, probably in my top 5. And just seeing him when he's younger, it's kind of like not funny, but it's like when he gets angry or shouts loud, I'm like, there's the Christian Bale that I know. And like you see the seeds of like everything coming in. But as an opening today, I technically I saw it at 1 a.m, but I absolutely loved this on the first viewing, and I just thought it was quite an interesting take to see an American director almost tell a British story in China during the war. Well, sorry, in Japan, not China. I know there's Shanghai and stuff, but yeah. How did everyone feel about just that premise as well?
It's well, yeah, I think it's a war film. I think you can classify it as a war film. I also think you can classify it as a prison break film. It kind of fits into the Great Escape kind of area of film and stuff like that because it slots into those two kind of film areas, if that makes sense. But no, like I completely agree with you. It's really unusual to have that much kind of variety just from the basis alone of an American director talking about a British perspective of the war, that being an expat and stuff like that. I'm really intrigued actually, because I haven't looked much into this film about the casting process to kind of get the various different actors, because there was an awful lot of both British and American actors and also Japanese actors who worked on this film being involved. So I'm really intrigued on that side of it.
I was just reading that, because obviously, you know, have the Wikipedia page open. Apparently, the 4,000 child actors auditioned for it. And yeah,
Batman wins.
But no, you're absolutely right. Like, war films are quite, you know, they cast a broad net, and I think what people associate with a war film is rightly what you said, George, is more akin to sort of an action film, and you get sort of the American heroes or whatever, just fighting the Germans or the Japanese and saving the day and all sorts of things. Some of them can be quite macho, I guess, and that's sort of, I guess, what majority of people will see, and you know, that's obviously just my sort of me speculating. But you know, I always find the more interesting war films are the ones that are introspective. So I'll keep harping on The Thin Red Line as well as an example, but you know, that's an introspective war film that looks at its characters, at its view on the human interaction with nature and stuff like that, and it's very sort of somber. It has a bit of action in it, but not that much. And I think this is along a similar line. So it's about, much like other Spielberg films, and we talk about you know, Close Encounters, as I said on the Close Encounters review, that it's about sort of the childhood innocence and, you know, the optimism of childhood. It's very much a similar theme going into this one, and whilst everyone around the main character, around Christian Bale's character Jim, is quite nihilistic and almost sort of has given up, he's the one that is the most optimistic, the one that looks for sort of heroes where he can, and you know, he's the one that is hopeful, and I think that really strikes through in the narrative. But it's a testament to, you know, Spielberg as a director, that he can actually pull these performances from child actors. And I think some directors don't really know how to work with children. He's very much seems like a director that knows and understands, you know, what it's like to be a child in these situations, and will get the best out of them.
No, it's really well said that, and I think with Bale, just talking about him still, this is his second film, and his first one came out the same year. So, I think, you know, you get those shows. Obviously, we'll know we're British, but remember, like E4 and Channel 4 back in the day, but what was it? Was it RuTube, when you'd get like viral moments off YouTube? And I always remember one for like actors who you don't know were in stuff. And I remember like Christian Bale was doing like TV adverts as a kid. And it's obviously half the people forget that he's not even just British, he's Welsh technically, isn't he? And it's really interesting with him, and what we sort of mentioned there, the whole stuff. Let's talk some of the background. So, you know, with this film, I guess it's worth saying first off that J.G. Ballard wrote a semi-autobiography, took his time as well. JG is the same name as this character, isn't it? I think it's just Jim, not James in this. And he wrote this in '84, and the film rights were snapped up straight away. Now, I've not read any of J.G. Ballard's books. I know that two of them off the page here. Tayte, you'll be familiar with High Rise, that was adapted into a film.
Yes.
And Crash, I think, as well, is the one I've heard of. And the bit of background is that when Christian Bale was cast, he said that Christian Bale looked like him naturally when he was younger, which is quite interesting. They've probably gone for a combo of being able to act and looking like himself. And Tom, what you mentioned, the Spielberg, the innocence of childhood as well. Spielberg spoke about Bridge on the River Kwai, a film I've not seen, so I think both of you two have. I feel like one of you two's mentioned it to me before. Was one of his favorite films growing up as a kid. So, which are apparently similar in themes. Again, I've not seen it, so that's just me looking into that. But has anyone seen River Kwai? Is that the Alec Guinness one?
Yeah, very long time ago. very, very long time ago, to the point where as soon as like I knew that the comparison would be brought up, I do need to rewatch it. It's been that long ago. But no, I do remember there being some similarities to kind of the themes and involved in the film and stuff like that. Obviously, this is seen through the eyes of a child in this film, but it's more akin to the adult actors in the film that you could see the similarities. Tom, have you seen Bridge over the River Kwai?
Many years ago, I like you have to rewatch it. I
Yeah.
forgot everything about it. Like, genuine. It's you know, if I haven't seen it for like a decade, then I'll sort of push it out of my memory and make way for new stuff that rots my brain.
No, that's absolutely sound. And listen, it does happen with a lot of these, and I think with Spielberg, it's all, you know, I'm not. That sounds really fascinating. He's been around for a while, but with that, like the Lucas Spielberg Scorsese sort of youth, well, not youth group, but was it the Rat Pack they called them, when they sort of broke in, getting past the studio system in the sort of early 70s, late 60s. A lot of their films growing up in wartime's a thing within itself. Teen years in the 50s, which I know is a big thing of George Lucas, you know, when you get American Graffiti and whatnot. It's really interesting seeing what inspires them, because nowadays, all the modern directors, what inspired you? Well, Star Wars, Spielberg, 80s, and, you know, the younger wave coming in and now doing the whole Dark Knight, Nolan. And it's really interesting that these guys were kind of there before the IPs, which, you know, not that it's a bad thing to be inspired by stuff like Star Wars, but it's always really interesting when you've got, you know, these guys that what did affect them. And, you know, off viewing this for the first time, sort of heading into the direction, I think this is one of, I mean, there's a lot of great Spielberg films, and I say this a lot, but this was a very good film for a first viewing for me, for a film I knew next to nothing about. I was surprised at how much I took to it, and very early on. It's very unfair to compare this to Color Purple from last week, just given the concept and the nature of that film. But for Spielberg to come in with back-to-back dramas, and, you know, Always Is Next, and Nothing About, which I think is a drama as well, 3 in a row before we get another blockbuster. This was something that just felt different. It had that Spielberg touch. So you could watch this knowing it's a Spielberg film, and it felt like a Spielberg film. Whereas Color Purple, which we both did enjoy, and I think is very good, it never feels like a Spielberg film, and that's not a bad thing. But when we're doing the series, it's like, you know, the young protagonists, you know, the whole running of the plane, all that sort of stuff. This felt so tailor-made to Spielberg, and it's really fascinating to see him come on board for this, because I'd imagine at the time this probably wasn't the kind of film people would also expect Spielberg to do. Especially, you know, with the 80s, especially after what, ignore that, even after 1941, which is, you know, just around about 10 years before. So how do you feel take like the direction of this film and Spielberg's stamp on it?
I was going to say, because this is a complete U-turn on what 1941 was, even subject matter kind of, and everything that was involved with that side of things. But I mean, you watch the film, and the first thing you're immediately drawn into, and this is once again down to the performance of Christian Bale, and also just down to the performances of the people around, and Spielberg's involvement and everything there, is that sense of childlike wonder, which he's able to get from any film, even if it's adults involved in the film. Like watching Indiana Jones, you get this giddy sense of childlike wonder as soon as he's going after the golden idol. And this is something that he's able to get from actors even in kind of desperate and despair situations, which is just a fantastic kind of way you're able to kind of put things forward as a filmmaker. And that kind of combination with kind of the music and John Williams coming through and just everything else involved with this film, it just paints such a great grand picture of kind of this character and of this story. And he's able to do it not only through kind of the fictional work that he does, but through autobiographical or semi-autobiographical works as well. I'm trying to think how many he would have done at this point, which were kind of based off something beforehand, which weren't original kind of ideas. And I can only think of Sugarland at the moment in my head. Yeah. The fact that he's able to kind of take a piece of work, or even take something like a news story in Sugarland and turn it into something that's visually kind of not only appealing, but you can engage yourself with through the amazing moments and through also the terrifying moments that are seen in this film, he's able to convey every single emotion just through the lens, which is just phenomenal.
I would say this is, easily one of Spielberg's best looking films, comparatively to his early works, and even some of his work now. I think that visually it's so striking that this often gets overlooked compared to his other work. There's some beautiful imagery in here, and it's got the Spielberg stamp all over it. The guy has been working, well, at this point, decades. And has honed his style to a T. And you can just immediately tell, even without reading any up on about it. Just the first image, the first like 5 minutes, you can tell this is Spielberg, and he is one of the best directors at portraying, at making war films. And I think he's made some really good ones. Saving Private Ryan is a different story.
Wow, we're not too far off that. That's the late 90s. That's going to be a mega one. But Tom, you mentioned the cinematography there. I mean, obviously, this is mainly Spielberg series, but it's worth mentioning. I mean, Alan, I can't remember his name, Duvall. This is the last film he did with Spielberg, and he worked on a lot of them before. Spielberg's very first film, Amblin, the one that clusters the Astrocon this series because no one can view it, no one's ever seen it. He worked on E.T. with him, Twilight Zone, The Colour Purple, then Empire of the Sun. Nominated for an Oscar for this film, then criticised the Academy for not nominating Spielberg, which I actually have immaculate respect for, given that he says it's his vision that means I can do this. But just it feels, again, you mentioned the Spielberg touch, it's taking that you've seen on blockbusters, on films we've really enjoyed, that people have grown up with at this point, that were mega hits, and seeing it on a drama. And it's when I keep thinking back to when he loses his parents in the crowd, there's thousands of extras there. And like I'm not saying that's not CGI. I hate saying that in films where it doesn't really exist the tech, but it's like when you're getting the shots from above where you are seeing that entire crowd. Some films will say there's hundreds of extras and you never see it, you just told it. But when you can actually see it, it's really interesting. And the whole, I guess it's not an adventure as such, but it's almost like an inverted Spielberg film, that you've got this kid setting off by himself, going on this whirlwind of a journey. But it's not for fun, for fame and glory. It's because he's been separated due to a war. And the inherent meaning of it is, and this is what Spielberg spoke about, is that it's the innocence of a kid in wartime. And that theme is repeated throughout the film when he's speaking with the Japanese, what would you call them, with the guards at the camp, the captains, all the way up to the end where his friend gets shot and stuff. It's really fascinating because, going back to what Tom said, you don't get that in war films. And normally if you do, it's clouded in patriotism. And it never is of this. And even with like Christian Bale, I saw a film of his when I was at school. I think it's called, is it The Swing Kids? Something Kids. It's like the early 90s. He's playing like a Hitler Youth kid. And it's about these like 2-3 friends that are like rebels. And he becomes a Hitler Youth and a proper grassing them to the Gestapo and everything. And it's really interesting when you see these younger actors in these timepieces. But with this being obviously part of J.G. Ballard's youth, obviously some of it is changed from what really happened, which is understandable. I just find the whole premise is fascinating. And as well, to not focus on the European front, to not even focus, I mean, I know it's in Japan, but, it starts off with this British family, already well off there, and the war's coming to them. There's no setup of things happening. It's a really interesting way to bring it. And I don't think there's been other films like it. Normally they'll just, shower you with information about like, this is happening in the war, this is where we are, or they've like radio broadcasts and everything. But everything you find out is all at the perspective of Christian Bale. And I think that's what makes this film work, and that's why it stays so consistent. And even though we've only been going 20 minutes so far, this film's really rising quite high up in my head of how good I think this is.
It's really interesting because now you mention it, a lot of films, whenever they talk about kind of the Eastern theater with war and stuff like that, what was happening in Asia, it is immediately Pearl Harbor. nothing else happened. It was just Pearl Harbor or it's the 2 atomic bombs. There is no in between at all. And this kind of, it does encompass those 2 events, but it never focuses on them. It never really talks about them for more than a minute. And it just kind of focuses on what it was like to be in the war in that situation, which is really brave, because you could very easily have at the start of the film like some images of Pearl Harbor being bombed and then cutting to the situation that they were placed in, or you could have easily had, I know they had the shimmering light and stuff like that towards the end of the film, but you could have had like a cut to the atom bomb and stuff like that. But they never did that because it wasn't relevant to the situation that you were placed in. A lot of the time with things in war, like, it's overlooked because it's the big events of the war, but people are still in a war elsewhere. Like, it's, the war is still happening and it's still being experienced by people. So to see it from a completely different perspective is fascinating, and also to see it from the perspective of a child. Not many films do that. I know that Come and See is the big one. That is the one that people talk about when seeing kind of experiencing war as a child. But this film's able to do it and just kind of make use of Spielberg's, once again, sense of childhood wonder and bring kind of that side of it as well, which is really interesting.
Yeah, one of the things I would also say is that, you know, whilst it is portrayed through the lens of youthful innocence, that it doesn't shy away from the Japanese brutality, and quite frankly, they were, you know, during the Second World War quite brutal in how they treated prisoners of war, and you know, especially the Chinese. So it's good that it doesn't shy away from that. Obviously, you know, the way it's portrayed through Jim isn't as, or he might not see it as brutal as it is, being sort of youthful. But I'm quite glad that you know, it didn't shy away from that fact. And you know, whilst it could easily have gone the other way, and Spielberg could have easily not shown sort of the brutality of it, which I'm glad he did portray.
Yeah, I mean, the brutality of it's interesting because obviously, you know, the age we're at as well, we know. Well, I mean, I think we know, and I think, well, American schools probably don't get taught this stuff because they don't even learn about the Holocaust, apparently, which is ridiculous. We know how the Japanese were, as you said, Tom, like prisoners of war. There were always stories where people would rather kill themselves than be POWs from the Japanese. And it's always been really interesting looking at that side of it. As you said, Tate, you only hear about sort of the start and ends. You don't really hear about the in-between of the stuff in Japan. And actually, before the new series, I'm going to rewatch The Pacific. Not that really means too much, but that's obviously part of the whole Band of Brothers and the third one coming out. Watching this, I mean, we could see the innocence on screen with Christian Bale, but what I keep going back to is that we're not seeing them at the most brutal, which is fine. You don't need that. It wouldn't work for this film. But it's just seeing how Jim doesn't understand what's going on, that he doesn't understand why they all hate each other. And I think that's the sort of the beauty and the horror with the film, is that he's so innocent. You know, when you get to the end where his friend it gets shot, we know he's going to cut the mango, but John Malkovich doesn't. And 99.9% of people in that scenario would have done the exact same. They see someone with a sword above a kid, of course they would do that to protect him. And I think that's where sort of we'll get some of the characters a bit, but with Bassi in it, he's incredible, I think, because he is that, not smart or edge, but he's the realist, and he is who we probably know. He knows what the system is, but he's nicer with Jim because he knows Jim doesn't know. And it makes really like a really fascinating dynamic across their relationship. And again, I just don't think many other directors could do this story this well. I think so many of them would fall victim to, again, making it like a really patriotic act of this kid defying a war camp, or they just have it in for the Japanese being these horrid people. And I'd say that I hate using the term "this film would never get made today" because people use that for the wrong reasons. But I honestly couldn't see a film like this being done in Hollywood now. I think there'd be too much agenda either side of it, whereas Spielberg comes in, and again, akin to the main character, he comes in, puts the actor front and center, and lets him tell the story. But with that, I mean, do we want to speak? I mentioned John Malkovich. Do we want to speak about some of the supporting characters quickly? Because we've not spoken about them yet. And I'm going to jump in. I knew no one was in this film except Christian Bale. Again, I've never gone on the wikis for this. I've never seen anything. When we first meet Bass, I was like, he sounds really familiar. Like, who is it? I was like, who is this? I was trying my hardest. I didn't go on Wikipedia, and I was like, who is this? Like, it's going to really annoy me because obviously they wouldn't show his face. They do the big dramatic reveal down the line, which is I think actually really well done. But yeah, a younger John Malkovich, someone that I've just always seen as old. I know that sounds really unfair, but like he's like in his mid-30s here. He looks like maybe it's a compliment. He's always looked like he's in his 50s or something. I don't know, but just Bassi as a character, I really enjoyed him. He's that. Yeah, of course you can't trust him, but being an expat, in this scenario, and the fact he gets caught because of Christian Bale as well. I thought it was a really interesting relationship they have because it's almost like the anti-father-son relationship. It's more of just them looking out for each other, and I think some of the supporting characters in this are the best. But yeah, where do we stand with John Malkovich?
So I mean, I haven't seen John Malkovich in much, but I was able to immediately recognize him. I feel like he has one of the most recognizable faces possibly in Hollywood. That it was a nice surprise to see him show up in the film. And yeah, it is that kind of like the way that he's able to handle his character of kind of that realism and a little bit that the kind of nihilism and stuff like that. Like things are down, I understand things are down, and he does put up with Jim very well, to the point where like he does start to kind of, look on the bright side of life with Jim as well towards the end. And it's a nice character transformation from someone who at the start he is just kind of like he's out for himself. There is no one else that he's looking out for. But as the film goes on, you can see his barriers break down, and that's a really kind of nice character trait to bring into it. And also amongst the supporting cast, various different British actors, who I'm going to try and rattle off now, those who I actually recognised. Nigel Havers, I love him in pretty much everything that he's been in previously, recognized him straight away from various different bits of media. And of course, the random kind of cameo of Ben Stiller, which I wasn't expecting from the film. I don't think anyone was expecting from the film. I was like, it's Ben Stiller out of absolutely nowhere.
I always forget. I always forget he's in that. Always, and I'm like, okay, oh yes, Ben Stiller's in this.
Yeah.
I would actually sort of try and counter argue your point, Tate. Whilst I think what you're saying is right to a degree. I think that what Bassi as a character is, he, at least in my opinion, that he's always, whilst he does like Jim as as a person and as a child, that he's he knows at a split second that I may have to ditch this kid to survive, and that's always present in his performance and in Malkovich's portrayal of the character. And it's over time that Jim actually finally realizes that this guy, he's, I'm probably better off on my own, and that's what happens at the end. Spoilers. Yeah, so I think whilst the two do have a mutual respect for each other, I think that there is an underlying fact that this guy will at some point abandon this kid, and does on multiple occasions, and leaves without him when he escapes, and then leaves him behind when he leaves the camp for sort of that final time. But I think it's a great Malkovich performance. I think it's an understated one as well. He's not chewing the scenery. He's not being bombastic or overshadowing Bale's performance. He is a complement. He's there to facilitate Bale as an actor. I think it's a brilliant Malkovich performance, and I really do. You sort of you root for him, you root for his character, but you do kind of, there is that underlying sort of not treachery. It's more deceit to him that I quite enjoy.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned that he leaves him numerous times or tries to, even at the beginning, like when he can't sell him. they're about to go until he tells them about the neighborhood that they can get all the stuff from, and it is a really fascinating relationship because it feels very real that people would be looking out for themselves in the war, and there even is the point where he does leave Frank by the end of the time. He's left Frank as well, and Joe Pantoliano in this as well, who spoke about last year of all the Matrix films and stuff. I think he's good in it, but it's that concept of the expats and when they come into it and how they're doing it. And I keep looking at Ben Stiller. I just need to talk about Ben Stiller. I'm sorry. I honestly, how like people talk about like classic films where like a big name comes in, and there's Tom Cruise in Tropic Thunder is a famous one, right? No one would have ever known it was him. And obviously everyone does now, but ironically, keeping it with Tropic Thunder, Ben Stiller, who would direct Tropic Thunder, I watched this recently actually, which is why it makes this funnier for me. Ben Stiller came up with the concept for Tropic Thunder whilst filming Empire of the Sun. I need to know more. But all I could then think of is, in Tropic Thunder when Ben Stiller's running away and the little kid runs at him trying to stab him in the back with the knife.
Yeah.
And he like yeets him across the bridge. All I could think of, like that kid is wearing a Christian Bale costume from this film. And it got really suddenly obvious then that a lot of Tropic Thunder, again, Prisoner of War Camp as well, it's just completely blown my mind since finding this out. But Ben Stiller, he was 22 when this film came out, probably younger when it shot. And again, it's really like cool to see his pre-comedy stuff. I know obviously his dad was a massive, comedy legend, and obviously had TV shows and stuff. But seeing Ben Stiller in a drama pre his 90s Patra films was really nice thing. And again, a bit like Bale, that's like a forgotten performance that no one really speaks of. And I just like the dynamic with them all, and even the other people in the camp where he's almost made Fabelmans. Now, one of the only, I don't know if this is fair to call it criticism I have, when you get the big time jump from 41 to 45, it never, I'm not going to, it's a 2.5 hour film, so I appreciate they've got to make that jump. But I never get a sense of time passing. Just that Christian Bale's like got a new haircut, he's got a jacket, and sort of life's moved on. I don't. Again, it's a gripe of the film. It's not an issue with the film. But how do you guys feel about that? Because it did feel very jarring. But again, I understand why you can't. You're not going to pad out a 4-year gap. That would just ruin it. If I'm being honest.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're not Richard Linklater. You're not going to actually have the actors age up for that time. Between the two gaps in the film, no, I found it a little bit jarring. I think it was just kind of a moment of it's a few years later. Everyone pretty much looks the same, and it's kind of similar situation. Everyone just settled down a bit. That caught me off. My only other real criticism of the film, and this once again comes down to possibly the story and what was translated from kind of the original book. And what they're able to kind of keep in there and stuff like that. I got lost slightly towards the end with the travel from the prisoner of war camp to the football stadium and then back again. That entire sequence felt like a dream. I did genuinely question myself. I was thinking, has he died? Is he now in heaven? Is this like a weird metaphor or something like that? Is it going to be a really sad, somber ending? But I got myself a bit lost in those kind of moments just because it was kind of like he's going backwards and forth at this point. But that's kind of, if that's actually what happened, then it's very difficult to kind of make criticism of that narratively because it's just translated from the book. So it's interesting to be able to see, and I'll try and have a look into it, how much of the actual kind of semi-autobiographical book was translated and how much wasn't, and what was heightened and what wasn't, and stuff like that from the actual real life story. Because it's always interesting seeing that from biographical things, because there's always things that will never be done perfectly right when it's translated. But I just, for at least myself, I found it really kind of jarring with that sequence of going backwards and forwards.
Yeah, I can understand that, and yeah, I do to a degree share it, because one of the things that you're not really given is a sense of geography and where everything is and what's. But I suppose the counter to that would be, well, that's sort of how the character is seeing that. He doesn't know where things are. He's only knows the two places: the place where he travelled to in the stadium and the place where he's just been. So it's toss up between the two, and he's just sort of going around in circles. But yeah, I do sometimes feel that it could have used a bit more sort of location establishment, because you see them traveling sort of out of the camp initially and wonder where they're going, and then just suddenly they popped into the stadium. Was it a few, obviously, with the cut you can assume that time has passed, but were they just walking 5 minutes? Were they walking for 4 or 5 days?
We don't need the giant Marvel thing where it says the location across the entire screen.
No, you don't. But some sort of like, because I do understand that sort of criticism and do share it. But I mean, I don't think that overly detracts from the storytelling, or what the film is essentially trying to say, that it's it being a coming of age story. I do think it's harder to age up children than it is adults, and that can be jarring, and I must admit it was a little bit jarring, but not to the point where it's like takes you out of the film.
I was going to very quickly, sorry, I was just going to jump in and say about the traveling and kind of sense of location thing. I mean, Spielberg has used a map to visually show you where things are before. I know it wouldn't work in this film, it would be quite jarring, but he does have a good sense of location in all of his films, and everyone seems to know where they are at all times. And whether it was the effect of whether he wanted us to feel jarred as well and feel a bit kind of like he's stuck between here and here and neither place is good kind of situation, or it just, I feel like it could have had something else done just to help it along, to be able to keep the audience kind of clued into what's happening.
Just going off the walk stuff as well, with what both of you just said, I really want to quickly talk about the nuclear bomb scene, because obviously, Oppenheimer's coming out next year, so we're going to probably have this conversation again. The nuclear bombs are very fascinating how people discuss it now. Obviously, this is the Nagasaki one they show. Obviously, the horrors of war, all that stuff. I'm trying to think about how to have this not conversation on showing it in war. Last year with Eternals, there was a big discussion. Hold on, have you both seen Eternals before?
Yeah.
I know you have, Tate. You know how it was used as a really cheap plot-centric device for a character to say, I created the nuclear bomb, humanity has failed me, I'm done. And obviously that drew a lot of criticism. I understood it, but I don't think execution worked in that film, if I'm being honest. In this, I found it fascinating to see the nuke from the perspective of a kid. Because, I mean, you've got to think contextually, at the time, nobody had a faintling of an idea what went on that day, if they survived. But what I found interesting was, as you said earlier, Tate, it wasn't the military. You didn't see the military, you didn't see them drop the bomb, you didn't see any of this. In the distance, you just get we know what that probably is. And then you get the wind blowing the little metal things and everything. I thought that scene was very well done. And obviously, you've got the prisoner that dies with them as well, and you get that great speech later where he thought it was her body going to heaven or something. But seeing the nuclear bomb, probably that's the first time I've seen the perspective of it being like, hundreds of miles away. It was a light in the sky, and that's how it was. I found that scene to be a big moment, because I feel like when they're going to and from the camp, that ultimately feels like something that could be cut out. But when you know that the bomb's in there, that's when you realize how integral that moment is. That it's obviously the end of the war is going to follow it. How do you both feel about that scene? Because I was really surprised it was in there, because the film's done so well to distance itself from the war itself. It's a very big moment, and again, it's understandable that what follows from it, but also just not dwindling on a discussion of war and stuff, but it's the use of the nuclear bomb in cinema is a very, I think the Wolverine did it, had a fair amount of criticism, the fact he survived it and jumped down a well and stuff. But how do you both feel with it in this?
I think the way it's portrayed in this film is actually really well done, because it never takes the focus away from whose story it is, and never kind of makes it a kind of, it's the war effort, even though it's a war film. It fully focuses on kind of just survival and what he's doing out there and how he's seeing the world around him. I'm trying to think of other films where it's being portrayed from a distance, and I genuinely can't think of any. And I do think the scene, I know it's horrible, like millions of people dying because of this explosion, but the scene, how it's portrayed in this film, it's kind of beautifully done, which is really bad to say, but the way it's portrayed and the way it's kind of shown, it's just taken from that perspective, and it just reflects so nicely well and fits in with the theme of the film. It wouldn't fit in to have kind of the big bombastic kind of blowing up thing, especially because we just kind of had that with the prison breaks scene. So it's interesting. It's really well portrayed, and yeah, I can't think of anything that's being done like it.
The war itself is always in the background and it's always present. But when you get to this moment, and as you say, Tayte, I would say that it's not overly bad to say that the film portrays it as a beautiful thing, because it's through the perspective of the character rather than the film itself glorifying the act, which is a different thing, which is two different things.
Yeah.
And I like that it's still kept the focus and the perspective through Jim, that he sees this thing happen and is quite overwhelmed with beauty. He thinks that it's the soul of this person that he's just sort of seen die go to heaven. And I think that's quite a beautiful moment. And this is where the film doesn't shy away from the sort of atrocities, whilst the war is still in the background, and you get glimpses of it here and there. When he gets to the camp with all the people trying to gather supplies and scrounge for food, the radio mentions the death toll and what it was, and it's always present, it's always in the background. And I think it doesn't, that's where it doesn't shy away from the atrocity itself, and the realization of Jim realizing that he got it wrong, and it's then him coming to terms with that act in that moment, which I found really, really great. And whilst the initial moment is beautifully shot and it's beautifully executed, the horror is brought to the forefront a scene later, which I really liked.
Really side piece tangent, and not to distract us too much. I'd love like a minute. Oppenheimer next year.
Mm-hmm.
Just going full in on Nolan. Any excuse to talk about that?
It's a very tricky subject for me, because obviously, like, I feel like even when I was a kid, I knew what the nuke was, but it was kind of, I hope you're not Call of Duty, but you know how like it was almost applauded. Where I feel like in the last like 10, or at least as I've grown older, you realize like the horrors of it. What do we think with like Oppenheimer, like making a film on Oppenheimer? It's got all the potential to be this fantastic biopic, a commentary of the scientist, or it's got the potential to be a horrific, patriotic propaganda, disgusting thing. Really quick, how do you both feel on just Oppenheimer being a film for next year? Because obviously I'm excited for the director, but at the same time I'm very nervous, because when you have something like that on screen, you have all the potential. You get the tone wrong, you get the ideals wrong, and it's not going to work. I know it's irrelevant to this chat, but again, with it being used in a way on this that feels different to how we've seen it before, against something like Eternals, which just did it for cheap character development. I don't know how you both feel with that film next year.
He is one of the kind of most famous, and I guess given modern history, the most important people. So I'm actually shocked that there hasn't been a big production kind of biopic of him before. I'll put it that way. The fact that you've got it in the hands of Nolan, who's one of the biggest directors nowadays as well, I'll put it this way: the film's going to be seen, and I don't think you would have to dance around it in that subject, because even though there are atrocities that come with kind of the result of what he did and the film, like there's certain elements of the story that you can look into without even looking into the bomb side of things. Like, for example, they were originally looking into radiation as a kind of use for energy or a use to kind of cure various different ailments and illnesses, which have both been used as well because of what has happened. But as far as kind of that side of things, yes, you could take the patriotic route. You could take kind of the route of him being the hero. I doubt that's going to be the case. I genuinely do think it's going to be a kind of, it's going to split audiences on whether you see him as a hero or an anti-hero because of his actions. It's going to be very, very interesting to see. And yeah, I think, yeah, really interesting, I think.
The I mean, yeah, you've gotten us onto Nolan now. So George says,
it was just more for the angle of, you know, like a Hollywood sort of
I mean,
thing.
Yeah, the portrayal, I think more needs to be done. It's very. I mean, you don't really get much of it. Although what I would like to see in Nolan's new film is a sort of a Frankenstein-like horror film where it's science gone mad and gone wrong and is distorted for improper use. Which that's something I'd like to see him do for it. But you know, I think more needs to be. The portrayal of the atomic bomb needs to be, you know, put in the forefront of discussion when you're talking about, you know, films like this and also Oppenheimer. It's something that doesn't really get discussed and is just sort of, I think, forgotten about because it killed so many people and it's just kind of like swept under the rug.
Yeah, no, exactly. A bit of a tangent to then move it back to this film, but it's just curious again with that. We are a year away, so
quite depressing tangent, I must say.
Yeah, I know. It's like now let's lift the mood and
Williams.
Now
let's talk about John Williams. Yeah,
John Williams.
John Williams. Here we go.
I mean, we've got a quick plug. Thanks to Tayte Sister, we've got loads of John Williams footage on the channel recently. We've got the Kenobi theme being performed live for the first time, and we've also got the Imperial March and the Raiders March. So check them out if you're a fan of John Williams. We've literally just been raving about him every week. He wasn't on The Colour Purple; it was Quincy Jones, but we have him back. I'm going to be blunt. I didn't notice the score as much with this film. Now, I will probably see this film again sooner than we think, maybe actually next year, because of what we just discussed. I didn't notice the score as much. I'm going to sort of hand it over to you two. Did anyone notice it? Because I mean, when I say I don't notice John Williams' score, that normally means it's just good, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, that sounds bad. It is not that at all. But I was so sort of focused on the characters and what was going on, I didn't really take in the other stuff. And I'd say the one score bit I remember is the when the attack comes at the prison war camp with the planes.
I notice score quite a lot when the characters are just either reflecting on something, like the moment where like the sun is rising and they're playing for the national anthem, and then Jim's just kind of stood there just kind of saluting and stuff like that. Like those kind of scenes and those kind of moments, the score really comes in. There was one moment in particular though which I really enjoyed, which was towards the start of the film where he's taking his model plane out and he finds kind of the big crashed plane.
Yes.
And he's just sat in there in the cockpit just being a kid, and the music in that scene was phenomenal. Really, really well crafted. And do you know what? You say it's phenomenal, you say it's really well crafted, and suddenly it's just a John Williams sweeping score. That's all it is. Like it's not a criticism of John Williams at all to say that a lot of his scores in some of these films, which aren't as kind of big and as famous as his big ones, can just interchange and nothing would change. It's just good music. Like you could plop that score into any of his previous films that he's worked with Spielberg, and it worked perfectly fine. It's absolutely not a criticism. It's his music is so good, and he's done so much of it that it can literally just be picked up and placed into any film in any context. It works.
Yeah, I would argue that this is one of his most underappreciated scores. I absolutely loved it, and whilst it's not as in your face, which isn't a criticism, as as in your face as Star Wars or Indiana Jones, those famous themes. I think it accompanies the film, and that's really what I think good John Williams scores do. They are accompaniments to the piece. They're sort of more symphonies in themselves, where they evoke emotions through what you're seeing rather than just giving you a big theme. Which I don't get me wrong, his themes through his blockbuster scores are fantastic and will always be fantastic. But I think having a more understated score rather than a big explosive one for this is very appreciated, because I think that would take away, if you had a more explosive score, it would take away from the emotion of what you're seeing, rather than you'd just be focusing on the music rather than the images. So it's a good side piece, a side dish. You order your main course, which is the film, and then you order, I'll have a side of John Williams with that. Thank you.
I think as well with John Williams, for some composers at their best, like their best is like at the level of like just John Williams on a standard day. That's like how good his music is, and that's not meant as like a disrespectful term, but it's probably used to Tom is underappreciated. And if I get to see it again, I'll be able to take it in more. And I just think he's the master of what he does. And again, his relationship with Spielberg, we spoke about it for so many weeks already. They just know how to work with each other, and sometimes it is as simple as that. That's why they've worked together for sort of 40, 50 years that have followed in almost every film since, because of their relationship with one another. And again, even seeing him on stage last week, Celebration, obviously we're watching it from home, but Harrison Ford coming out and talking to him, about his career and his score and his music, and just wanted to wish him a happy birthday. He's just an absolute legend of cinema. And with that, we'll talk about a few other things. So box office for this, a lot of the time we're talking about breaking records and whatnot, but with this being an Oscar type film, an end of the year drama, we'll start with box office very quickly. It grossed 66 mil off a 25 mil budget. That's absolutely fine. Not really bothered when it's a drama like this. I think films like this, again, we're looking at it from Spielberg's career, but Oscars are really interesting because this is his second outright drama after Color Purple. Me and Tayte probably think it's a third, really, if you put Sugarland Express into it. 6 nominations for this film, none for Spielberg. Going with the technicals, didn't win any Oscar either, but it did pick up a few BAFTAs. Now, one thing I didn't say, this film was pretty much shot in England. I think Elstree. And obviously they got some filming stuff in other countries. I think it was the first American film to film in China, actually, for decades. Probably wouldn't get that now unless you're shooting at death camps. Just looking at Mulan to put something out quickly. And yeah, how do we, again, like talking Oscars in past tense is so hard, because we know that an accolade doesn't make a film's quality, but we've been doing this series for so long now, and it's only like number 11, and it's, again, Spielberg's its level of everyone else, where we're still there, like no best director Oscar. It's going to be a massive talking point when we do get to the film he wins his first one for. But it's just incredible to see, again, we know how the Academy works. It is almost like that bias that because he's done the big blockbusters, he's not going to get that. Not that he needs a best director nomination, but for his cinematographer to come out and criticize the Academy, where do you both stand? Again, it's more of a commentary on the Academy and the Oscars and them as a process, but I'm just amazed watching this film, like the direction of this film. We spoke so much about even just him directing the actor, the set pieces, the location. How is he not getting the accolades then that we know? If a film like this came out this year, it'd have won Best Director. Do you know what I mean? And we didn't even get Denis Villeneuve nominated this year, which just says how wrong the Academy is. But am I over talking Oscar stuff? Just let me know.
Well, interesting. I just wanted to check, because it's always worth checking how much adjusted for inflation that number is on the film, and it's ended up at about 170 million, which is, when you look at 66 million, it's like, oh, that's not too much, but when you take it into context and go, oh, it's actually like 170 million, that's actually a decent box office for an Oscar film. That's a very good box office for an Oscar film. So it doesn't sound as bad of a number. If we're talking about kind of the Oscars and stuff like that, at this point, has he actually been nominated for anything at this point? Because we were talking about it last week on The Color Purple, and he wasn't nominated for that. That was nominated for a lot of things, and he wasn't nominated for director there. It seems like, I don't know what the context at the time would have been, but it seems like the Academy Awards just don't like him. They like his films, but they're not willing to give him the recognition and give him the respect on his name, which is fascinating, because it's like, wow, like how has that happened? And I know that's happened with some famous directors in the past. I mean, you could immediately look at Alfred Hitchcock, kind of, and his films, but it's unreal that he's not able to pick up anything up to this point so far.
So he's had, at this point in time, 3 nominations as a director: Close Encounters, Raiders, and E.T. And then nothing until Schindler's List in terms of directing, not best film, which is quite maddening. And again, I'm kind of putting up Nolan. They just have sometimes, like when there's a very popular director, they want to like avoid until it reaches a point where they feel like they must, get them involved. I hate using that phrase. Again, like Denis Villeneuve this year. How do you have a film that wins 6 Oscars, gets nominated for 10, every single technical award possible it's up for? And it's like, no, we're not going to even look at nominating the director who is the reason any of this gets crafted and is made there. Like, it's more of a conversation on like how the Academy works. But even for Spielberg, I mean, when we get to, I think it'll be Jurassic Park, I'll speak about that interview where he's just, I think the one he speaks the most is Color Purple. How the film can have 10 or 11 nominations, what was it, and not one of his, and not win one either. It's a really interesting thing. And just looking at the film that won the Oscar this year, I've not actually seen it. It's The Last Emperor. So I'm not too familiar with that at all. And that's about, obviously, the last Emperor of China. But it's a really interesting conversation with it. But again, just watching this, like, I mean, I would say this is, well, completely different genres, but I'd say this is better than E.T. Completely different films, but for some of the films he's been nominated for, this certainly stands out for other reasons. I don't know how anyone else feels with that.
I mean, I'd say it's a better film than E.T. because I'm not a big fan of E.T. But as far as his other ones that he's been nominated for, you look at Raiders and you know that Raiders is never going to win anything because it's the popular film choice. It's just not going to happen. But with this film, it is a drama. It's more tailored towards the awards, so it is surprising as to why it doesn't get that recognition, especially when it got 6 nominations. Did it win anything in the Oscars at all?
Not at the Oscars, just at the BAFTAs.
It's really interesting because I'm surprised it didn't win for cinematography. I'd be fascinated to see. I'm guessing Last Emperor, because that film does lean on cinematography quite hard as well, would have won it for that year. But it's really, really interesting about kind of what it's been nominated for and what recognition it's getting. It's held up better than Last Emperor, by the way. As far as like films, people are more likely to talk about this film nowadays than they are about The Last Emperor.
It does confuse you though, the how the Oscars, how some films can get nominated for so many sort of awards that they sort of overlook directors. But would that be because those awards are individual ones for, like, obviously that is completely obvious that they are individual awards for those categories, but best director is overall production, and how would that correlate to, because surely a film nominated for like for example, say another film gets nominated for 10 12 Oscars, but wins all the others except for director. How does it correlate to the over? Because surely that would be the because everyone else had won those. Those are making any sense?
No, you are.
No,
I'm trying to think of any film which I can think of just off the top of my head where there's been a bad director but good performances and good editing and good things around that. And
Joker.
No, Joker.
Anyone could have directed Joker. They just managed to get Joaquin Phoenix playing Joker. I think it's a really below average film there now.
Yeah, I'll agree with that one. But when you look at a film like this is definitely not Joker. This is definitely a well-crafted film.
Yeah.
Like different camera shots, kind of the ability to get performances out of someone as young as Christian Bale at the time. Everything down to the cinematography, just like you were saying earlier, with kind of that the cinematographer doesn't get nominated if the director doesn't tell him to get that shot. Like it's absolutely insane how you can kind of figure out that the director doesn't get nominated, yet it gets nominated for 6 other things to do with the technical kind of side of it.
Yeah. But then that goes back to George's point of, you don't need awards are just sort of meaningless at this point, and a film's quality isn't dictated by how many awards it's won. Really shit films can win loads of awards, like, say, for example, the King's Speech. Really shit film.
I don't mind the King's Speech, but I've not watched it. I've not watched it in about 6-7 years.
I'll be honest.
I was going to say I've not watched it in a long time.
And it's also made for TV and just happened to be released at the cinema. Made by a director who doesn't really know what he's doing.
And that's Cats.
Yeah.
George, I'll put it this way: King's Speech came out the same year, same Oscar year as Inception, right?
Oh yes, I know that was the very first year I watched the Oscars. So I feel like I was a bit. I feel like that's why I'm not as harsh on it.
So George,
Black Swan's year as well.
I was going to say, which film would between Black Swan and Inception and The King's Speech, which one would you say was a better crafted film?
Obviously, now it's going to be Inception, but I'm pretty sure that year's got like Toy Story 3, Inception. Oh, yeah. That was like an insane year.
It was a stacked year, and the one that shouldn't have won anything won everything.
The old Oscar. And what I wanted to say, actually, kind of with this, and I won't touch on them too much given the screen time, but one of the big things with the Oscars for anyone curious is that when Harvey Weinstein got big, he basically figured out that all you need is just aggressive marketing to win Oscars. But even for films, and obviously in the years that followed, that's still a thing now. That's what all the companies do. It's all about the marketing campaigns for the films, the release, the structures, the press tours, all that stuff. That wasn't around as much in the 80s. It was still there. But even when that stuff kicked in, when a lot more films now, what we just spoke about, like King's Speech, even back then in the 80s, it wasn't as bad as it is now. But moving aside from all the Oscar stuff, we've mentioned a lot of scenes. I want to sort of just ask each of your favorite scene or favorite moment of the film, because I enjoyed a lot of this film. I'm not going to lie, I really enjoyed a lot of it, and there's some fantastic moments. But is there anything that particularly stands out that you might not have spoken about yet? Or,
I mean, my favorite scene personally is kind of the scene with him with the model plane, and then the bigger plane is sitting in the cockpit and pretending to be in a fight. I think that it's so Spielberg-esque. It's just the perfect Spielberg scene, if that makes sense, from the film. So that would be my favorite scene. I think we've talked about all the other kind of scenes which I've really enjoyed as well, like the way they're able to portray kind of the atomic bomb, and also I guess the prison break scene we didn't really go much into. It's a big action scene and stuff like that, but him stood on the rooftop shouting out kind of his praise for the Cadillac of the sky. I really enjoy that as well.
Yeah. My favorites are obviously when he finds the crashed plane and sees the Japanese soldiers. Really good. That is really it's sort of that wistful innocence meets the potential atrocities of war, and just who are these people? What are they doing here? Why are they waiting? Really good, and I like the build up to that moment, that confrontation between that garrison and this small child. Another one of my favorite scenes is where he is saluting the pilots that are flying off initially, where he sings. I'm going to pronounce this really, really horribly, but Siugan, the Welsh lullaby, which is the best piece of music in the film, by a country mile. That is really beautifully shot, and then all of a sudden, wham! In come the planes to sort of take everything out. I love the build up to that as well, and how that is shot.
Yeah, that scene was just phenomenal, and again, it's that Spielberg thing when he wants to bring in the action or wants to do something in the scene. he can do that, and you see the craft. I think there's a lot of like long takes as well, and it's being able to see the set designs, the production. It's all that stuff that comes together that makes things like that work. I love the scene where it's after he loses his parents and he has that maid that slaps him. And not it's funny or anything, but again, it's the innocence of the kid. Like, he doesn't understand that isn't his house. What's gone on? He doesn't know anything. He's just waiting for his parents to come home. And I found it really fascinating, the moments after he loses them all, him trying to go about his life in a way that isn't going to be possible. And I found that whole stuff very interesting, because that's something that probably would happen, right? If there was a kid in that scenario, he probably would go home. But to the maid though, like, she's waited a long time to slap him as well. Like, that was so random and kind of fun. Because what did he say to you at the start? He's like, "You have to do exactly what I say." When he gets to get the biscuits, like, she's waited and bided her time.
But you can actually, now that Bale is older, and you can go back to that scene and think that this is probably what loads of actors want to do to him on set.
He's
just give him a big old slap.
I'd love him so. I'm so excited, because to be fair to Bale, for someone that's such an A-lister, you see him in press interviews. He's never like rude to the media. He's like a Daniel Craig. Like, he plays the game with them, but he's also like a very odd bloke. And it's obviously, I can't remember, one of the awards ceremonies, he was absolutely drunk and they all forgot that he's actually British when he goes like full Cockney. Oh, it's Vice, isn't it? But yeah, it's just, I'm really excited for like another Christian Bale press tour starting next month with Thor. But yeah, aside from that, let's head into final thoughts on Empire of the Sun, because I think we wrapped up pretty much everything we can say about this one. And I said I've really enjoyed this, but I'm going to give my final thoughts. I'm actually going to jump in and say, by the time this series is done, this will probably be a film that sits in my top 10. And this will probably be a film that I will say is probably his most underappreciated film, because I think this should be spoken about in the same way a lot of his other dramas are. Now, whether it's because it's so close to stuff like Indiana Jones, and it's that era where people don't speak about his dramas, or it's because it's also Near Always, which no one in the world's ever spoken about until next week. It's a really interesting film for him, and again, just what he gets out of the young actor, the cast as well, the ensemble. We mentioned some of the British actors as well involved in it, who I thought, young Miranda Richardson as well. I think this film was phenomenal, and it's not spoken about or clearly seen enough. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on it. I think it's just, phenomenal.
I'll agree. I really enjoyed the film. I think I was expecting a little bit more, actually. I think I may have overhyped it a tiny bit in my head, but it didn't mean that I didn't completely enjoy it as well. Will it end up in my top 10? We'll have to see at the end. We've still got a lot of Spielberg films to go through. I think there's going to be a few surprise ones in there from the ones that at least are coming up and the ones that we've seen so far as well. So it'll be really interesting to see where it gets ordered in the end. But I do think it should be watched a lot more. I think it is one of those films which is underappreciated. And I definitely think, especially for those watching along with us during the retrospective, 100% you should watch this, 100%.
Yeah, it's easily one of my favorite Spielberg films, and that's sort of a barometer of where it might sit on my list of favorite Spielberg films. But near the very top. Spoiler alert for that. But actually, one scene I actually really forgot to mention, which is right at the very end, where he sees or finally gets reunited with his parents, and that is an absolutely, like, initially you think they're going to just overlook him because he looks so well, he looks so different, but the realization that is their son, and him sort of touching his mum's face and realizing who these people are, because previously he'd said that he'd forgotten what his mother looked like, and that scene just is heartbreaking, and it's so sort of it's the emotional high, and I absolutely love it, and I love this. It's brilliant.
The reunion scene's an interesting one because it's taken into the context of how long they've not been with him, and it's that glance of he almost doesn't acknowledge them, and that's when you know time's passed. It's his reaction to meeting them, touching the lips almost to check he's not dreaming it. It is a fascinating one, and I think as far as the final scene goes, he speaks about when he moves on from his parents, doesn't he, that he forgets what they look like earlier on in the film and stuff. It's a really fascinating journey, but it's earned when you get there and the reaction to it. And what I quite like as well, not to sort of discredit them both, the actors playing the parents like British theatre actors. They're not big names. Sometimes when you bring in big names for smallish roles like that, it can actually devalue scenes. But, like 1917 when Cumberbatch just rocked up for the last 30 seconds.
Mm.
And it's like, I am the general after all. And yeah, I'm great. I'm going to save you all. Not that there's nothing wrong with being Cumberbatch, but when it's a big name, it can take you out of the moment. And I'm so glad it didn't, that we got to focus again on Christian Bale.
Perfect. So I guess this is the kind of end of this video. So please comment along below on your thoughts on Empire of the Sun. Please tell us if you've watched it. Please, we love to hear loads of feedback on this series and on this channel. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, all the rest. Also, find us on all of the social medias, including our new ones. That is Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy, facebook.com/cinemasavvy, letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy as well, and Redbubble in the description to pick up a new t-shirt, jumper, cap. I think they do stickers on there as well. There's everything on there with loads of different designs and everything like that. Also, Tom, would you like to tell us about what you do as well?
Yes. So I run a film blog called Films and Beer, where I pair films and beer. It's very self-explanatory. I pick a film, then decide what beer would suit that film best. And you can find it at www.filmsandbeer.co.uk.
Definitely.
We were gonna. I was gonna say I was gonna put you on the spot. You did think about it beforehand, but could you think of a beer that could be paired up with this film?
Yes, and I just need to find the name of it because
until then, we'll let him get the name.
Yeah.
If you're after a chocolate bar to have with the film, you've got some free advertising from Hershey's that gets a payoff at the end of the film as well with John Malkovich. So that is in there as well. But has that given Tom enough time to
yes.
get the beer?
So anything by Hitachino. So that's really good Japanese beer. I had some with when I reviewed the Wolverine. But I think this would probably be a better fit for it. So Hitachino, you can get their Nest Classic. That's pretty good. But yeah, any Japanese beer would probably suit.
Definitely. So everyone, please do check out not just the beer, but the blog as well. Tom, it's always a pleasure to get you on these. I know we're going to get you on some more across the series, I think. And next up, I guess we could say, is Always. The film I know nothing about. I know who's in it because I've done the posting, and it's got some weird photoshops for the posters. But that's going to go up on Tuesday, the 14th of June. Tayte is going to be in Austria for a few weeks. Tayte is going back. So we'll be back in July with Tayte, but he is going to miss, and I keep saying this, a few, maybe not all. We haven't got, what I guess is worth saying to people, at the start of the series we were like 2-3 weeks ahead, and now we're sort of even again, and it might expand back out, it might not. So we're sort of figuring out our schedules, but I'm just going to bring up the coming soon tab for you all at home. We've got Always, which, it's going to go. Then we've got The Last Crusade. Then we've got Hook. And then we've got Jurassic Park. And obviously, there's a mega one that follows that. I think when we get to next week's one, we'll have the best coming 4 section of the entire series, if I'm being honest. But we will have more details on who's going to be joining us for them, if I'm going to be absolutely honest. We've had about 15 people get in contact with us for Jurassic Park, which is extraordinary. And we know we kind of 15 people on a stream anyway. So, as always, more details will follow nearer the release, nearer recording dates. And we like to get people involved at home. So comment your thoughts on those, what those 4 you're looking forward to. So yes, that is going to do it for today. This is Tayte. So do like, subscribe, all that sort of stuff. And join us on the next one. We'll be live tomorrow night with another Obi-Wan Kenobi spoiler discussion at 8:30 p.m. The reason it's at 8:30 p.m. is because there's a review about some dinosaurs coming at 8 p.m., which I'm actually not bothered about. I'd rather see Top Gun again. So there's my Jurassic World Dominion pre-watching thoughts. Until then, thank you all for watching, and be sure to join us on the next one. Take care.